Hey everybody, welcome to episode 3 of the Averils of Chipping Norton to Ipswich and Beyond, Lives Recast. The Averill family left the wool town of Chipping and arrived at Ipswich, Massachusetts, which was then a vast woodland known for its rich soil, fish, and land fowl, about 1635 or shortly after. Family life at Ipswich taught them all the same lesson. Nothing in the Averill lives in New England was inherited except for hard work. By their teens, the brothers were parceling out their futures along very different paths. John, the youngest child of William Sr. and Abigail, was the first able to gravitate towards neighboring Topsfield, where in 1653 he lived with Isaac Cummings, most likely as an apprentice, and he possibly learned the rhythms of husbandry and barter. On March 28, 1654, John deposed that Isaac had bought a yearling heifer from Mr. Simons, a small moment in court that reflected a world where every animal and words of testimony certainly mattered. Court records reveal some possible characteristics of John. First, that he was somewhat a fiery guy. As in 1656, he assaulted Jonas Griggs during a Sabbath service, no less. This assault was considered a double whammy, a disturbance of the peace and profaning the Sabbath. Since we know through documentation that John was fined, we don't know at the time of this recording exactly how much he was penalized, except for it would have been between 10 and 40 shillings, an amount that was probably very hard for John to cough up. In 1656, when John Averill brought suit against Daniel Epps for failing to return a cow, he stepped into a pattern familiar to the early Essex courts. Neighbors disputing livestock, each convinced of their own right. Now, Daniel was a man of some standing in the region, and he had kept the cow through the winter, and I quote, for necessity of the animal, as the record noted, a practical choice in a very hard season. John, younger and less established, likely saw it otherwise. A cow in that world was no small matter. It meant milk for the household, calves for trade, and tangible measure of self-sufficiency. To John, the animal's absence might have felt like a breach of both trust and survival. But the decision did not go John's way. The court found for Daniel Epps, reasoning perhaps that the animal's welfare justified its keeping during the winter. John was ordered to pay Daniel's court costs, which was a modest sum on paper, but a stinging rebuke to a young man trying to assert his competence in a world where reputation was as valuable as property. That he pursued the matter in court reveals much about John's temperament. He was seemingly strong in the face of a perceived wrong. One might surmise from these court documents that John was assertive, independent, and quick to defend his interests. His sense of justice was probably personal, immediate, and practical, rooted less in legal finesse than in the plain conviction that what he thought was his should be respected. In 1659, John failed to appear in court regarding a case in which he was involved with Sarah Marshall. As a result, John had to pay her costs, and more research will be conducted regarding this case. Then John disappeared from the colony, unmarried as far as I know right now, and what happened to him remains a mystery. But from the primary records we do have, one could gather that John was in the process of learning, though sometimes awkwardly, how to navigate law, build a reputation, and survive in a tight-knit colonial community. Thomas, John's older brother, also left traces in the Ipswich courts. In March of 1657, he gave a deposition in the court case known as Fuller, et al. Versus Cummings, showing both his familiarity with the Cummings household and his standing as a man trusted to speak under oath. Then, December 8th of that same year, he married Frances Collins in Ipswich. By 1658, Thomas was presented for a debt against John Andrews, an ordinary difficulty in a barter economy where coins were scarce and promises were long. By 1666, proof shows that Thomas in Topsfield, he was in Topsfield because he was paying tax to help defray that town's debts. That same year, his first child, Sarah Averill, a niece to our Sarah Averill Wilds, was born. 5 years later, in 1671, a second child arrived in Wells, Maine. Evidence that the family had joined the steady flow of settlers pushing northward for new land and opportunity. Thomas lived a long life by colonial standards, passing away in Wells sometime before April 7th of 1714. He left behind a modest estate and the quiet legacy of steady labor and perseverance. His inventory, listing a horse, items of iron, a cooking gridiron, a grindstone for milling grain into flour, an old house, and possibly a canoe, and 126 acres of marsh and upland. This suggests that he may have lost some of his earlier means when he relocated to the northern frontier, much as his father had seen his own fortunes diminish upon crossing the Atlantic some 40 years earlier. While John wandered between apprenticeship and dispute, and Thomas followed the pull of land to Maine, William Jr., the oldest of the three, built a life of endurance and quiet accumulation. On the 31st of July in 1661, he married Hannah Jackson at Ipswich. A couple of years later, they moved to Topsfield, where William became a central figure not only of his family's stability, but that of the town as well. By the late 1660s and 1670s, his steady hand and years of labor had already strengthened the family estate. He was likely responsible for much of the wealth increase noted after their mother Abigail's death. William's consistent farm work, tending cattle, bartering fowl, managing grain and tools, left its mark in inventories of iron, brass, and livestock. William died in Topsfield in 1691, remembered not for court cases or conflicts, but for continuity and economical growth. His was the Averill line that held the ground while others drifted outward. The collective stories of William, Thomas, and John reveal a transformation from the sons of a bailiff in Chipping Norton to New England farmers, first at Ipswich, then in Topsfield, and in Wells. Their choices map the colonial pattern of restlessness and resilience. One brother pushing north, one testing the courts, and one staying to tend his farm. Stay tuned. The next episode premieres on October 15th at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time, where I'll explore William's increasing fortune, steadfast devotion to his family, and the enduring bond he shared with Sarah and John Wilds, a friendship that began as early as 1635 and endured until William's death in 1691. Thank you.